Returnal, a bullet hell roguelike experience developed by Housemarque and published by Sony, is a PlayStation exclusive and is known to be the first so-called must-have game released for owners of the PS5. I played this game off and on for about 8 days, basically just over a week of me owning the PS5 before completing it. To me, Returnal is best described as a double-edged sword. 50% of it I really do like, and 50% of it I absolutely despise. Ultimately, I have more pros than cons, but the cons here are wretched enough that they drag the game down to a level it shouldn't have gone. The game would have been better suited if certain design choices were reversed, which would have made the experience as a whole worth the trouble. I've read accounts online from people that have had this game for over a year and still can't complete it. Call me crazy, but that sounds a bit far-fetched to me. While the game is without a doubt challenging, I fail to see how someone could play this game for 3 to 8 hours straight and still fail to complete the first boss, yet these are the stories that I've read online. However, the ultimate question is this: is Returnal actually good, or is it a bad game? As usual, I'll discuss the pros and cons, and the audience can decide based on the information given. Beginning with the pros, the combat system is fluid. The pacing keeps you engaged from one encounter to the next, and it offers plenty of variety in terms of approach, weapons, and pickups. What's brilliant about the combat system in Returnal is the emphasis on preparation. You need to know how to use what the game throws at you in order to achieve the best results, and make it farther within the individual run that you're on. And sometimes the cards can be stacked against you just for reason of sheer bad luck. It will then be up to you to decide if continuing the current run is worth the time and effort, or you can simply choose to suicide yourself and begin again. Graphically, this game is stunning. The effects of the bullets themselves appearing in the form of energy beams or bursts of neon plasma launching across the screen at you is a sight to behold for sure. But what truly stands out here is the art direction, which has a nice variety across each major biome, with the two most impressive stages in my humble opinion being the second with the Desert Tower stage and the last being presented as this underwater arena filled with monstrous creatures of the deep. There's a mysterious nature that's characteristic for each of the 6 levels in Returnal, and they never truly get old even if the layouts for them start to wear their welcome. Some of the weapons in this game are thrilling to use. When you come across a new weapon pickup, there's a sense of discovery to unlock its secrets, as each weapon has no more than 3 permanent weapon upgrades that the player can pursue simply by gaining kills with that firearm. The more upgrades you have, the more firing variants that a particular gun possesses, the stronger chance you'll have at besting whatever enters your path. While there are a few standouts from Celine's arsenal, the standout weapon is without a doubt a variant of the Spit Maul Blaster, which will fire its usual 5 shotgun-like rounds with a powerful emerald beam down the middle. It's easily the most powerful weapon in the game, especially when the player's weapon proficiency is upgraded a great deal. Speaking of which, the upgrades are also a standout in this game. Returnal within of itself isn't an RPG game. As a result, the upgrades are there to bolster the player's strength for as long as they last until their next failure in combat. What's clever about the upgrades is that they come in a few varieties, but some are double-edged swords. For example, you have these creatures known as parasites, which can be found throughout the different rooms you enter at random. Each parasite has a specific effect that will grant the player a buff of some sort, but they also come with an active negative status effect. Some of these include getting a discount on weapon vendors, but the player will take damage whenever they pick up a new item, for example. Or you'll run into rare negative effects where the game won't allow you to pick up any new weapons or healing items at all. The parasites aren't permanent once you decide to pick one up. You can simply find a room that has a machine that will allow you to enter and remove the parasite, but the effects of that parasite will be lost as well. This is a brilliant system because it forces the player to take risks. You just have to be smart about the system because not all parasites are worth the risk. And you may just want to skip certain ones entirely, especially given that you can only carry 3 at a time. Try to pick up too many items with malignancy and your suit will experience a kickback, which could cause you to lose items that you desperately need, such as a spaceman figure, which gives you a second life, or a large first aid kit, which will net you more than 25% of your lost integrity back. There's a lot of depth to the upgrade system, and you'll need to carefully pay attention to what you should pick up and what you should leave behind if you want to make any substantial progress. Another standout with Returnal is the music. This game has an amazing soundtrack that, despite the game's presentation, actually has an arcade feel to it. Composer Bobby Krilic outdoes himself here, presenting one of the best original scores to a video game I've heard in a long time.
this melody from me? Or did I learn it from you?
Each track is easily distinguishable and is filled to the brim with emotional overtones. This is truly the hallmark of a great score in the medium of video games, and whether you like the game itself or not, it can be stated that the soundtrack is one that can be appreciated outside the actual game itself. Last but not least, I don't ever give props for things like this, but I will give praise to the third boss fight in this game, Nemesis, which has to be one of the best bosses I've played in the last 10 years of gaming. Fantastic presentation, music, gameplay, everything about that boss was perfection incarnate. It's ironically also the hardest boss among the 5 in this game. What Housemarque did with this boss is so insane that its design is simply pleasing both to the eye and with controller in hand.
This game has a lot of problems, but I will give them credit where credit is due with this boss fight. Give them credit where credit is due. Yep, I'll definitely give them credit for that. If nothing else.
And now I will move on to the cons. Returnal, despite some of its strong gameplay and presentation elements, ultimately is too frustrating for its own good. Housemarque made some really stupid choices with this game's design. The one thing that Returnal emphasizes is that it's a roguelike game, meaning that it's a game in which the level itself will shift, completely changing each time the player falls in combat. This would normally bring a good sense of variety to the gameplay if it weren't for the fact that the game is actually aimed at the hardcore audience, the same brainless cult-like audience that likes the Souls-like genre. Now, throughout my time with Returnal, I've been back and forth to determine which genre is actually more frustrating, roguelike or Souls-like. And I've come to the grand conclusion that Souls-like, despite its many flaws, has something a roguelike in the vein of Returnal doesn't have, and that's a sense of progression. A Souls-like game actually allows the player to get stronger, making tough challenges bearable. This is because most Souls-like games are RPGs. Returnal isn't an RPG because the player can die within a few hits. It can feel like the game is cheating you, and skill has no bearing on whether or not you can get through the game's toughest challenges. In fact, it feels that the game, with its absurd emphasis on RNG, feels more based on how much luck the player has, rather than how good the player actually is at the game. Now, I'm not saying that skill is entirely absent as a factor for completing this game, but it can be stated that luck plays a huge factor in how far you go within each specific run. I died so many times in this game that I lost count, and most of the time, I died because something either attacked me off screen, or I had to suffer through questionable design choices such as the 2-second delay on the dodge button, or I didn't have the appropriate items I needed in my inventory, and the game refused to give me those items, or the game gave me the wrong weapon and I had to suffer using a piece of shit in combat, or I fell through the level in the wrong place at the wrong time and died as a result. All of those things and more happened to me during my experience, and it all made this game far more frustrating than it has any right to be. Another thing that's terrible about Returnal is the way it handles narrative. The presentation of the story is rather simple. You play as an astronaut named Celine who pilots a spaceship named Helios, which crash lands on a remote planet, Atropos. Celine soon encounters corpses of herself as well as logs left by her on the planet and realizes that she's stuck in a time loop that appears to be infinite. One could think of it as the video game version of Groundhog Day. While desperately searching for a way out of the loop, she slowly regains memories of her past life that led her to the hell that she's trapped within. The problem with this story is that there's no definitive answers by the end of its runtime. Instead, if you manage to make it through the game, the final cutscene doesn't offer any further answers, but instead beckons more questions as to just what the fuck actually happened throughout the entire runtime. What's more, the game's hidden third act, which offers a secret ending only unlockable after the player is forced to replay the entire game again to conduct a scavenger hunt for items they need to unlock the secret ending in the first place, also offers no satisfying conclusion. The game is ambiguous and purposely open to interpretation from start to finish, and the problem there is that the game is way too frustrating and anger-inducing to make seeing the quote-unquote story through all the way to its anticlimactic conclusion. I have the same issue with the Souls games. If you're going to make a game intentionally difficult like this, then you as a games developer need to make absolutely certain that the story is worth it. If the journey isn't worth the trouble, then what's going to happen to the player base? It's going to drop, like crazy. Which is what this game's player base did, exactly. In fact, a far better time loop game that did the concept much better is another game that came out in 2021, and that's Deathloop. While Deathloop didn't nail its ending either, what it did provide was a satisfying build-up all the way through till that final cutscene. The journey that game provided was much better than what's seen in Returnal, and Deathloop is nowhere near as frustrating gameplay-wise by comparison. I've said it time and time again. Chasing the hardcore audience does nothing for a development studio except lose sales and potential new customers. This could have been easily avoided, but when you place limits on basic quality of life features such as the save feature being completely non-existent and forcing the player to restart from scratch, losing all of their hard-earned upgrades, weapons, and items, which is something that not even the Souls games do, you're begging for a total loss in revenue.
get it. I still don't get what happened. I don't get this game at all, dude. This shit is stupid as hell. This shit is stupid as hell, dude. What?
Lastly, the in-game content is simply not strong enough to encourage the player to replay the experience, and unless you just enjoy the gameplay that much, there's no reason to continue playing even with the useless tacked-on third act, unless you want to go through this tower challenge that they later updated into the game, which ironically is much easier than the actual base content itself. It's funny how that works. Returnal is a solid bullet hell game, but it's a terrible roguelike, if there is such a thing, because they're all pretty bad games in general. As a narrative-driven game, the story presented here is weak as all hell, and the content after it's all said and done is even more frail. There's a number of different changes I would have made personally had I been in charge of development, but Housemarque made the game that they wanted to make, and as a result they had to reap the praise of the not-so-sophisticated gaming journalists who overrated the piss out of this game, as well as the overwhelming criticism from general consumers who wish they would have gotten a better product, especially for the initial $70 price tag. I, for one, enjoyed it for what it was, but here's hoping that Housemarque learned from their mistakes, and they actually make a better game the next time around. Something that seems to be asking too much these days in the modern gaming industry. Go figure.